One side thinks this is happening, the other side thinks that's happening. There's not that much information out there. And like overall, this is a really confusing and complicated story. What's going on, everybody? My name is Brian and I'm a doctor who's also an avid sports fan. And it's my goal in these videos to break down common sports injuries and help explain them in a way that's easier for you all out there to understand. I gotta say, preparing for this episode was a really hard time. I thought it would be an awesome thing to look at, but the more I dove in, the more complex and challenging I saw that it was. Nonetheless, what kind of channel would this be if I didn't address potentially the most controversial injury in recent NBA history? That's right, today we're going to be talking about Kawhi Leonard and his entire quadriceps injury saga that happened while he was with the Spurs. As you might remember, there was all this controversy between what was actually going on with Kawhi Leonard and why he was missing so much time. Members of Kawhi's camp thought that he had a quadriceps contusion and wanted to treat it a specific way, while the Spurs doctors thought he had a quadriceps tendinopathy and had long ago cleared him to return to the court, yet he was still missing time. So what the heck was actually going on here? What are these two different injuries and why did there seem to be so much drama and confusion about what was actually happening? Let's first break down some anatomy and explain some terminology, because as you know, I hate using these big complex words. Quadriceps obviously meaning the quadricep muscle or the thigh muscle. It's the major muscle involved in jumping and extending our leg. And because it's named quadriceps, it's composed of 4 separate muscles. Now, it's not important at all to know what the names of those muscles are, so I'm not gonna waste your time. But what's important to understand is that the different 4 muscles come down here into the quadriceps tendon. So a tendon is a structure that connects muscles to bones. So the quadriceps tendon is connecting the quad muscles to the bone of the kneecap or the patella. Below that, you have the patellar tendon, which is the structure connecting the patella or the kneecap here down to the tibia below it. To explain some other terminology, tendinopathy is basically a catch-all word to explain some sort of damage to a tendon. The opathy part of the end of that word basically means damage to anything, so tendon damage, as opposed to something like tendinitis, itis meaning inflammation, so tendinitis, inflammation of the tendon. Contusion is just a big fancy word for bruise. So what is different about these two injuries, and could it help in any way explain what might have been going on? First, let's start with a quadriceps contusion. So your quadriceps is a huge muscle. Like, this is cut off, but imagine getting a really hard blow to that muscle belly. Similar to if you get hit in the arm and you develop a big bruise, that bruise is actually blood and bleeding inside the muscle. So whenever you have a quadriceps contusion, it means that there was some direct trauma that's caused bleeding and damage to the muscle structure itself. The danger of a quadriceps contusion is that you develop this big blood formation inside the muscle, and over time, if not treated correctly, that collection of blood can solidify and turn into calcium deposits. There's a condition called Myositis Ossificans, and that's a fancy word meaning myositis, muscle, and ossificans, ossification or hardening, so muscle hardening. And this is kind of what it sounds like Kawhi Leonard's camp thought was going on. There was a lot of talk about bleeding that then solidified and calcified and caused damage. They never came out and said this is what he had, but that's sort of the implication based on what they said and what would be concerning in a quad contusion. On the other hand, a quadriceps tendinopathy implies that there's some damage to the quadriceps tendon itself. Again, this is kind of a catch-all term, so it's hard to know if they thought there was inflammation in the tendon or if it was just degeneration and kind of wear and tear of the tendon. But regardless, the tendon was damaged rather than the muscle belly being damaged. So you can imagine you're going to treat a muscle injury different than you're going to treat a tendon injury. There's a lot of overlap between the two, but they're two different structures in the body and so have to be addressed in 2 different ways. Typically with basketball players, they're repetitive jumping, and if they do anything that increases their training load, that puts more repetitive stress on that tendon. This is that tendon. You can see the kneecap on the back here, and imagine if I bend this repeatedly, jump after jump after jump. The more I do it, the more it might cause these fibers to break down and become damaged, ultimately leading to pain. You might remember more controversy whenever Tony Parker came out and said that he had suffered a similar injury, but 100 times worse. But that's completely different. So Tony Parker had a quadriceps tendon rupture. So his tendon actually tore. They went in, they corrected it, he got back to playing eventually. And so while certainly it sounds like that's worse to actually tear it, it might be easier to recover from than some sort of chronic damage to the tendon that just keeps hanging around and can't ever go away. If something's torn, you sew it back together, you go through the rehab and you play, but if you've got this continuous pain and issue in the tendon that just lingers and lingers, it can be a bigger difficult time for the player. Now, it's impossible to know what they were doing in terms of treatment for one of the problems versus the other because, like I said, there's a lot of details missing. But regardless, I hope that gives you a sense of how these are two distinctly different problems. Sometimes they can go hand in hand. You can have a muscle contusion that's near the tendon, and so the tendon can become injured because of a similar effect. So there can be some kind of different subtle overlaps depending on what actually happened. But in general, think of these as two different problems. Muscle contusion, problem with the muscle, risk of blood developing in the muscle, calcification, hardening, leading to all kinds of other problems, versus tendinopathy or tendon problem. Chronic, just kind of repetitive wear and tear, damage to those tendon structures that ultimately can linger around and cause repetitive pain and discomfort. Part of what can make these quadriceps injuries so difficult is oftentimes you're resting and doing different therapy until the pain essentially goes away. But as soon as you get back to playing, you're at risk of having recurrence of your pain. So if I'm going out and I'm running 10 miles a day and that's causing quadriceps tendinopathy, I quit running 10 miles a day and it feels better. But then if I go back out and try to run 10 miles a day, I might have the exact same problem. So I think that could be part of why there was so much back and forth between playing, not playing, being worried about pain, but then the pain being better. This really can be a vicious cycle. And similar with the contusion, depending on how much soreness or stiffness you're having, you might be able to play or you might not. If you look now when he's on the Raptors, they're giving him a lot more rest time. And I'm guessing this is very intentional, trying to prevent him from having any repetitive overuse injuries to those same structures. Regardless of if this was a muscle contusion or a tendon problem, they don't want to overexert him in unnecessary ways, and they want to really be safe and make sure that this heals. I hope that was helpful, kind of explaining the difference between these two injuries and hopefully giving you some insight into why there might have been so much drama and controversy. As always, thank you for watching. Leave any comments below. Love hearing from you guys and kind of having ongoing conversations about these injuries. I'm keeping track of the videos you guys want to see in the future, so don't worry about that. We'll get them out here soon enough. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.